to come to the whole issue of how we're handling climate, if I can nip right back to the mid-70s, I'm a young Australian fresh out of school, and I find myself sitting in lectures being given by an American, very high quality teaching, I've got to say. I've no idea where his politics would have lain. Isn't that an incredible thing?
Yeah.
I wouldn't know. Wouldn't have known then, still couldn't guess now. Anyway, it was an admirable American. One day he said to the class, do you know what lifeboat ethics are? Lifeboat ethics? None of us had any idea. Anyway, in essence, to cut to the chase, it was the view of emerging cutting-edge Greens, environmentalists of the day, that the greatest challenge to Mother Earth was that there are too many of us.
Right.
And
that's
we
the
would
population bomb.
We'd have to cut our numbers, and someone would have to make some very hard decisions about who stayed in the boat and who was thrown overboard. And he said, what do you think it'd be worse? One of the ones to be thrown overboard, or one of the ones who made the decision to throw someone else out? And obviously you're a monster if you're going to make those sort of decisions. Why do I refer to that all that time ago? I think we can see this emerging again with the absolute single-minded, we've offended Mother Earth. We humans are the enemy of the earth. Without mercy, we must sacrifice ourselves, which somehow never seems to mean the biggest agitators for climate change as they fly around in their jets. Somebody else is going to, there's too many of us. Aren't we seeing a return of a sophisticated version of lifeboat ethics?
Oh, yeah. Look, what you have is first of all, this has been there for a long time. If you go into the history of the environmental movement, very early on, it was the Rockefellers, it was the Ford Foundation, it was the people who owned Fiat, the Agnelli family, the limits to growth. I mean, basically, this has come from the high level. And look, I've had quotes from members of the royal family, members of Jacques Cousteau, basically saying, "Oh, wouldn't it be great if we had some sort of virus that killed half the population of the world?" I mean, they literally say things like that. Or, the idea that people shouldn't aspire to own a house and have a backyard. I mean, the whole idea is so anti-human. Now, my feeling is, if you want to deal with climate change and you want to have it work in the long run, you got to do it in ways that people can deal with it over time. You don't cut their electricity. If you have to use nuclear power, you use nuclear power. You push things like remote work so that people don't have to commute. That's something that people like, and you can have real results. But the problem is that it's not just an idea of how do we save the planet, how do we reduce emissions. California, we did a little study on this. With all our policies, we've chased out so much industry and so many people. Then when those people move to Arizona or to Texas, their footprint is much bigger than it was here. Because one thing is, it's been hot the last few days, but generally speaking, we have a very mild climate and we tend to have relatively low usage. So, for instance, if my wife and our family moved to Houston, our carbon footprint would double right away. Because we'd have to run the air conditioner for 6 months of the year. We probably would live in a more distant location. And the problem is that what it's become is virtue signaling. It's it's not, hey, you know what? It's better for Australia to produce cleaner fossil fuel energy than have it done in China. But we don't make that because our goal is to prove that Australia reduced its emissions by X%. Aren't we great? Well, it's global warming. It's not Australian warming. If we could take care of the climate change by what we did in our individual countries, that would be a different thing. But clearly, China is now emitting more GHG than the EU and the US put together.
And here's, because I'm glad you say that, because where's the critical thinking, including, I have to say, amongst young people? You teach them. I made the point to a bunch of young people in Australia the other day that they're probably on board with the green thinking in Australia. We should stop our extractive industries.
Right.
Well, while ever China's building 170 new coal-fired power stations, and Indonesia 56, and India 45, and Vietnam 11, they're trying to lift people out of poverty. That's not a bad goal in itself.
Same thing in Africa.
It's Africa,
South Africa in particular.
You're going to be better off exporting Australian energy. Well, you know, not all of our coal is cleaner, but most of it is, than coal that's going to be used out of Indonesia or China. And it was a novel thought to these young people. I hadn't thought of it like that.
Well, because they've been taught that and of course they'll make the point. Well, the Western societies created all the carbon and all that. Okay, first of all, climate change was happening before the carbon. Now it may have made it worse, which I'm not a scientist, but I could accept that may be a factor. But climate has been a formative thing way before we had cars. If you read Karl Harper's great book, The Fate of Rome, he talks about Rome almost as if when there was the warm period, Rome did great. When it got cold, it began to decline. These things have been happening. There's the Little Ice Age. There's a lot of other things going on. People don't have the whole picture, and therefore they have a very simplistic idea. Like everything was ideal until this. Well, there were things happening before. There was this thing we had here in this country called the Dust Bowl.
Yeah, in the 30s.
In the 30s, temperatures were hotter. It was drier. We had a drought here in California in the 19th century, which was so bad that they were considering abandoning the city of Los Angeles because there was no water left.
There was a drought in Australia in the 12th century that went for 37 years.
Really?
Yes.
See?
Scientists tell us. Now, I don't want to sound like a climate skeptic, a change skeptic, because I'm not. It is changing. I'm a farmer. I'm at the interface, of business,
right,
my livelihood, or my family's livelihood, and climate. So it's important. But it's the way in which you're not allowed to debate the way forward in the things that we've just said. Another classic example is that I think the international accounting system's wrong. So Mr. Olaf, in Sweden, thinks that because Volvos are no longer made there, Sweden is doing better. Its numbers look better because Volvos are not being made there. They're made in China and then taken back to Sweden.
Right.
But Sweden's getting a lopsided accounting number, as I understand, out of it because it wasn't made there. Still consumed there.
But that's also, what we have here in California is we've chased out industry, but we still buy the stuff.
Yeah.
So
consumption rather than production.
Right. Right. But you see,
might be a better way of measuring it.
But I think definitely a better way of measuring it. But the problem is that you have in a place like California, what you do is you chase out industry. This was what may happen to Australia. It certainly happened in the UK. They're trying to turn around now, but once you begin to destroy your industrial base, which includes natural resource industries and even agriculture, then there's no lobby for those interests anymore. That's what's happened in California. Outside of the tech industry, there's the public employees and the tech industry. Nobody else has any influence anymore, because you've taken a state of California which had a huge industrial base, and you've essentially gutted it to the point that it's a fraction of what it was, and therefore there's no. You're a politician or a former politician, recovering politician,
a survivor.
A survivor, that's right. Or you've been through the 12-step program. but the reality is that what you have is you don't have the lobbies like here in California. Agriculture just doesn't have the power it used to have.
Yeah.
And then you start getting things which I think as a farmer, like, first of all, on the question of how you deal with climate change, the main thing is you have to adapt. How do we best adapt? I don't want to hear, there's going to be this huge surge in the sea level, which, so far has not happened, but let's say it happened. Well, then prepare for it. If you're going to have to change the crops because the climate's gotten warmer, maybe you plant something different. what we're doing now, I mean, with this part of this extremism, you'll being a farmer, you'd be interested in this. You know, the whole war on nitrates,
Yeah.
and then the attempts in the Netherlands, in part financed by Bill Gates, to wipe out the Dutch agriculture industry. You know, one of the most efficient industries in the world is in the Netherlands. The Netherlands are particularly gifted in that area. You wipe that out. Now, what
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka is a great example. If yes, you can get rid of nitrates, but you're going to have to then, you're going to lose half of your productivity.
Half of the globe's grain production is dependent upon that. At this stage, we don't have the alternative technologies.